Serious. People who have lived on a supposedly haunted house, what was your scariest supernatural encounter? What was it like? I still live at my dad's home with my 2 kids and my partner. I've lived in this house for nearly 20 years, and my mum is a medium and claims this house is haunted, and there has been loads of people who have experienced things in my house. Myself included, but nothing major. Cold spots, hearing people run up and down the stairs at 1 a.m., seeing things out the corner of my eye or hearing things. Recently my partner moved in this year, and I've had 2 of the scariest encounters in the whole 20 years. The first happened earlier this year. My partner was carrying my son, 2 years old, down the hall. My son then looks up at the stairs as they walk past the bottom and says, "Who's that?" My partner looked up to look and there was no one there. He said that to my son, but my son remained insistent that there was someone there. My partner then said, "Let's have a look," and went to take him upstairs, and my son started freaking out and saying, "No, no, no," and tried to struggle out my partner's arms so he didn't have to go. This really freaked my partner out. Second encounter happened this June just gone. Me and my partner were in the kitchen making party food for my daughter's birthday the next day. As I'm sorting stuff, I see something like smoky white go past the doorframe of the kitchen out the corner of my eye. It came from the corner of the dining room, which is connected onto the kitchen, and went into the dining room past the fridge. I didn't think anything of it at first as I wear glasses, and I'm constantly thinking I see something when it's just glare or smudges on my glasses. I turn to my partner and jokingly say, "I swear I just saw something walk across the dining room." And what made the hairs on my neck stand was my partner looked at me shocked and said, "You saw it too?" We kind of looked at each other and was like, "Huh?" Even though we knew it was impossible someone was in the house, we went to check it out and check on the kids. As we both walked into the middle of the dining room, we both stepped into a cold spot that we felt at the same time, and it literally felt like ice running down my spine. I did not like the feeling. We haven't had any other experiences so far, but in the whole near 20 years I've been living in this house, those are the most active encounters I've experienced. It's an old Georgian house. I live in the UK, so it probably has lots of history inside its walls. I hope that there isn't anything actually in the walls. All these events happened at my dad's house. He still lives there, bless him. I moved in while I was in my early mid-20s. He was military and going to be gone for a year, so I got a job up there and lived in his house, but moved up a few months before he left. At first, I really didn't have too many bad experiences. It was new construction, he was the first to live in it, we were in a subdivision etc., so not the classic haunted house trope. Things started off super small and random stuff I could easily brush off. Hearing knocks. Seeing odd shadows here and there. All fully explainable. One time, the landline phone started beeping like someone had picked it up and started dialing, and when I walked over, the 6 button had randomly gotten stuck and was typing 6 etc. I don't really prescribe to Christian doctrine, so this didn't bother me in the "it's the mark of the beast" way, but it was just another weird thing. So dad moved out, I'm living alone etc. Honestly, despite it being my first time living completely alone, I wasn't that scared. We had an alarm system. My dad left a handgun in the house and I had training on how to use it. Most of the neighbors were current and former military guys and had been instructed to keep an eye out for me. I just mentioned that for context, that I wasn't overly paranoid or lost in my head with fear. So things ramp up a little bit. Sometimes it sounds like someone is walking around in the house even though I'm alone. Other times I'd be downstairs watching TV and hear a giant crash. The first few times I'd grab the gun and do a quick sweep upstairs, but I never saw anything, so after the first couple of times I legit just stopped checking. And honestly, his office served as the catch-all for random boxes and was such a mess if anything fell in there, good fleabing luck figuring it out. One time I was walking down the stairs and swear, it felt like someone shoved my shoulder, but again, I was living alone, and all these occurrences were benign enough and spread out enough that I wasn't living in fear or even thinking about this fleab when it wasn't happening. My dad was able to come back a couple of weekends during the year to check up on the house and see how I was doing. A few of these times, we'd both hear the crash upstairs. I tried to explain to him that it was nothing, but he'd always send me up to look. I'd go and report back that I had no idea. Other things would happen. I was usually a stickler for closing and locking the bathroom door when I showered, more habit from always living with people than anything else, but a few times, I'd get out and it would be wide open. Again, weird, but not something where the gut instinct was for me to pull out my town crier hat and start shouting, "Hunting." My sister came up for spring break that year, and we had a sissy week. Not much happened while she was there, but one day, I had to go to work and left her. She slept in and woke up to a terrible storm. Heavy rain. Hail hitting the side of the house. Eck. Not in any way terrifying, random heavy storms were not at all uncommon where we were, and she didn't think anything of it than other than like recognizing the fact, a storm. Until she went downstairs where I'd opened the sliding glass door curtain, and it was sunshiny and dry as a bone outside. No storm at all. Stuff was weird, but we brushed it off as a dream or something. Things hit a turning point probably a month or so later. I was alone. Late at night. Upstairs in my bedroom. I always closed and locked my door because my logic was if someone does break in, that's one more obstacle for them to deal with while I call the cops etc. Well, that night, I hear footsteps in the hall again. Except this time I'm upstairs with them, not downstairs. I legit just keep reading my book and refuse to acknowledge or check on it. It was that weird duality of, okay, this house is fleabing haunted, and I've seen enough movies not to open the door, and ghosts don't exist, this is all but a robot, I'm a logical person, and will prove it by ignoring whatever that is to make my point. The noise continues like someone is just pacing up and down the hallway over and over. Literally this continued for over half an hour. I got super fleabing frustrated and shouted out to shut up. Well, this pissed it off because now it sounds like someone running up and down the hallway. I fleabing freak. Start texting friends I know are awake. Turn on all the lights in my room. Went from proper reading to fall asleep to adrenaline in high gear. It kept going and going and going. I was just fleabing terrified and knew that there was no way in heck I was opening that fleabing door. I stayed up as long as I could and eventually passed out. When I woke up at 5, the sounds was gone, but all my lights were on, and I saw the texts on my phone, so I knew I hadn't dreamed it all up. Around 7:30, I have to leave my room and start getting ready for work. I go out and there's just nothing. Alarm is still on. No sign of a break-in. If it was a raccoon or other animal that got in, there was no sign of it or any damage. Just nothing. For what it's worth, someone did legitimately try and break into the house via the downstairs porch one night when I was watching TV. I wasn't half as terrified as I was the night this plumbus happened. Tried to talk to my dad, he doesn't believe me at all, no surprise there. Nothing as big or as terrifying as that ever happened to me again while I was there, and I lived there for almost another year. Still would hear the crashing, the footsteps when we were downstairs, knocks, etc. but nothing like that, thank plumbus. My dad thinks it's all a lark and for a while would regale dinner guests with my beliefs about the house being haunted. I moved out of state eventually. Would keep in touch with my dad. On the phone sometimes he'd complain about weird stuff happening in the house. Crashes at night but nothing fallen. One time he was in the shower and heard such a loud crash and felt the ground shake that he got out and grabbed his handgun and did a sweep of the house convinced someone else was there, but there was no one and nothing out of place. Occasionally, guys he knew would be stopping through and need a place to crash. One was Catholic and slept in the room that I used to have and said he had such a horrible, terrified feeling that he barely slept that night. Just something overwhelmingly bad. Dad thought he was fleabing joking, but the dude ate breakfast and left pretty quickly, and even when he'd come through town, he'd refused to stay at my dad's again. Another one was a super logical dude who I'm pretty sure was agnostic. He was with my dad downstairs when they heard a crash and my dad was just like, it's nothing and kind of had to explain. Later that night, old boy heard some knocks. Not enough to terrify him out of ever staying again, but like two grown, military guys who have both been in numerous combat zones, telling my dad that something wasn't normal about his house, seemed to at least convince him I wasn't making it up lol. 2 or 3 weeks ago, he called me on the phone. Had me on speaker. He recently had his girlfriend and her daughter move in, and they were complaining to him about knocks and footsteps while he was at work. He tried to tell them the house is haunted, but they thought he was butter roboting them, so he called me to be his resident haunting verifier. Gotta love him. My father has a habit of pausing in what he was doing and watching whatever it is you're watching before continuing off on whatever it was that he was up to. So, one time, I was just sitting alone in the living room, just watching TV when I felt him doing his thing of walking up, pausing and having a look. I was like, yeah, there's nothing really on, as I flicked through the channels to show him. I didn't hear him walking away again though, so I turned around to see what he was up to. Except I was alone in the room. It's not much of a ghost story, but the others I have, about seeing a shadow person in my father's room as I walked down the hall, or seeing what looked like our family dog walking into a room at the far end of the corridor, only to get there and find the room empty, or seeing a guy standing on the back porch watching me playing with our puppy until I looked away and back and there was no one there. Those are all equally non-amazing stories. There's other stories from that house that I can recount only secondhand though. Like when a guest was staying over and mentioned hearing someone walking up and down the front porch outside their room, but there being no one there, so my mother took a camera, stuck it out there, snapped a pic and went on with life. Then, later, when the film was developed, there was a sort of misty pillar approximately person-sized in the pic. Or when my father heard someone tapping on the wall as they made their way down the corridor, like they were running their knuckle along the slats which made up the covering, pausing on one side of his door, then continuing on the other side to the end, then coming back, pause, continue on the other side up the corridor, which could have been anyone living there, except for the fact that there's a standing bookcase which the tapping continued along behind, there and back. I heard the tapping one night many years later myself, or the time nothing in particular apparently grabbed the sheets and blankets from my father's bed and vigorously shook them up and down while he was in it. I remember when I was 4 years old, my mom and I were outside, and she was raking leaves and tidying up our backyard. My mom had to go back inside to grab some trash bags so she could bag the leaves. She brought in the rake and pitchfork she was using and leaned them up against wall in our laundry room. Our laundry room had a door that would let out to the backyard, and she told me she wanted me to stay inside while she bagged the leaves so I wouldn't get dirty. I was playing with my toys when suddenly I looked up and noticed that the pitchfork was freestanding all by itself at the other end of the room. Before I could make any sense of the freestanding pitchfork, it started moving toward me by itself in a fast-paced stabbing motion. All I could do was keep crawling backwards so it would not hit me. Just when I was about to run out of room and most likely get stabbed with the fork, it quickly returned back to the place my mom originally placed it, and then I saw my mom open the door and come back inside to get the rake and pitchfork. I was crying and told my mom that the pitchfork moved all on its own and tried to hurt me. My mom just told me I had imagined it and to calm down. I told my mom again that it did move and that she should throw it away. She told me to come back outside and she would show me that there was nothing to be scared of. I knew the pitchfork would not move again while my mom was with me because it only came after me when I was alone. This was the first of many paranormal occurrences that I have experienced in my 40 years of life.